welcome. Coming up tonight, why hasn't Boris Johnson quit when so many of his colleagues want him to go? The Attorney General, Suella Braverman, will explain. Who will replace Johnson and when? Matt Hancock has a view. Anushka and Screening will show why the numbers look so bad for the Prime Minister. The comedian Michael Spicer will try to cheer us up on a day that hasn't felt especially comical. And making sense of the mayhem, the rising Tory star Deanna Davison, the established Labour star Anna Sarwar, and a former star of Boris Johnson's team when London Mayor Will Walden. Watcher. Well, it's been quite the 24 hours for the Prime Minister. His Health Secretary and Chancellor quit because they can't work for someone they see as having lost integrity. Then there was a deluge of more junior resignations, representing perhaps a quarter of the entire government, and including Kemi Badenoch, Victoria Atkins, Will Quince, and others who are seen as the Tory party's rising stars. A mob of backbench MPs published letters saying it was time for the Prime Minister to resign. In other words, simple arithmetic seems to prove that time is up for Boris Johnson, which erstwhile cheerleaders like the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps have told the Prime Minister to his face. The point is, the Prime Minister has no legitimacy if half his MPs want him to go, with or without a formal vote of confidence, and he can't govern if MPs won't work in his team. But Boris Johnson is refusing to go without a fight. Tonight, his officials are saying he is calling his critics' bluff, will attempt to rebuild and will only leave number 10 Downing Street if dragged out, which is, I have to say, consistent with his history. This isn't just any chaos, it's Boris Johnson chaos. And although he helped to win the Tories a big landslide in 2019, this war between Boris Johnson and his own MPs will do his party and perhaps the country no good at all. Anushka.
As Robert said, the Prime Minister absolutely defiant tonight. Look at tomorrow's Sun front page. You'll have to dip your hands in blood to get rid of me. He told cabinet members, if I stay, there'll be a summer focused on economic growth. If I go, it will be chaos. And sources even told me he argued that a change of leader would trigger an early election that could result in a coalition between Labour and the SNP that would lead to the break-up of Britain. He thinks that he's only going to lose a couple from the cabinet tonight. We've already seen that, and I will come back to it. But let me start with this, the reason for all that pressure. Letter after letter after letter of resignation from cabinet ministers all the way down to ministerial aides. They are continuing to come in tonight. We're at 43 now. And you know what a load of letters allow us to do here on the screen? Make a word cloud, looking just at the paragraphs where they explained why they resigned. So, look, government is huge because, of course, that is all what they are leaving. But interestingly, let's look at what else came up again and again. Party, because a lot of people felt he was damaging the party. Country, people saying they needed to put country first. And words that kept coming up as well. Look at this. Integrity, down here, standards, and over here, judgment. As you can see, I've heard a number of them say to me they'd simply lost all trust. Now, the new Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, apparently argued in Downing Street that all of this makes it very hard to govern, even though he's not going to quit. And the PM's cabinet also warned about the possibility of a confidence vote coming if the backbench committee changed the rules. Now, last time round, Boris Johnson had 148 MPs voting against him, not enough of the 180 that were needed. Now, we thought there were maybe 20 ministers in there last time. But look, if 42 have quit today and last night, then that's bringing you much closer to the line, I think within around 12 of that line. And personally, I've spoken to at least 12 backbenchers today who backed the PM last time, but tell me they won't do it again. Now, if we get to this point, number 10 insists he would then step down. Robert.
Yeah, it's a question of what we mean by if he gets to this point, because I think many people do believe. I don't know, Deanna, do you think half the party is against him now?
I think if it comes to a confidence vote, it's pretty inevitable that the Prime Minister will not win it.
And so what do you make, as somebody who used to be a fan of his, what do you make of, I mean, that's, you know, the Sun's headline, you know, basically his critics are going to have to dip their hands in the blood. He's defiant. He's saying, you know, they're going to have to drag him out. What do you make of his posturing in that sense?
I find it so distasteful. I mean, I can understand wanting to stay in a job that you love and have fought very hard to get to, but anyone with dignity would surely kind of see the writing on the walls and do the right thing, and the right thing probably for himself, for his own reputation, but more importantly, the right thing for the country, and obviously we're MPs, the right thing for our party as well.
I want to bring in Will Walden, who worked for Boris for many years when Boris was Mayor of London. Will, this defiance we're seeing from the Prime Minister against what looks like the facts of the overwhelming opposition to him staying, does it surprise you?
No, not in the slightest, Robert. It certainly will be disconcerting for everybody, but for me, it's the Boris that I've already known. He's like an obdurate optimist. There'll be a couple of demons in his head, and one of them will be stick it out, and the other one will still be knocking on his head, telling him, in the end, it might all come right. So just keep going, mate. Boris doesn't do change. He doesn't do apology. And he doesn't, where possible, do resignation unless it's going to help him, like when he resigned as Foreign Secretary. And he doesn't do apology because the mantra for Boris is, if you apologise, they just play it back at you. So all his apologies are always qualified in some way. And as for change, I remember he pretty much screwed up a mayoral visit to Israel and the West Bank in 2015. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, we were sitting in the VIP lounge at Tel Aviv airport. And he looked at me and he said, "You're really expletive off with me, aren't you? But you need to understand I'm not going to change. This is who I am, and it's never going to change." And I think the final point is that, you know, when it comes to resignation, he is thinking, as Henna said, you know, he's fought really hard for this, and there'll still be part of him who actually genuinely believes that he can tough this out. And I think that, you know, the idea that he's going to pack it in anytime soon is for the birds. They will have to drag him out kicking and screaming. And I think what's happened in the last few days is that the party has finally realised that.
Anas, you know, all opposition parties like to see governments tearing themselves apart. So none of what's happening today is going to be filling you with despair, I wouldn't have thought.
I think it's a whole other level, Robert, and I think you've heard this from people before, is this is not just the trashing of one man or the trashing of one political party. This is the trashing of British institutions and the state of Prime Minister in our country. And I think Will's hit the nail on the head. People in the Conservative Party knew who this man was. They knew he was a liar. They knew he was a cheat. They knew he was a man devoid of principles. And despite that, they foisted him on the country, and you've seen all the chaos.
But are you saying there's contagion to confidence in politicians in general?
Well, look, I think there's the contagion in the Conservative Party was, they knew who he was, but they thought he was the best chance of winning. So we thought, it's OK, let's inflict him on the country. And I think the key point here is, it's now got so bad that people can see it's not just Boris Johnson that should pay the price. Actually, all these MPs who have stood by this man through thick and thin need to pay the price.
Well, Deanna has not. You know, quite some months ago, you saw the writing on the wall and you changed your
To be fair,
view.
I don't think she voted for it.
But what can you and your colleagues now do if it's right for you and right for the country to get rid of him? How can you bring that about?
Well, at the minute, the speculation is that there could potentially be a change in the rules of the 1922 committee. As I say, it's all speculation at this stage, but there's going to be an election to the 1922 executive on Monday. I understand some people are going to put themselves forward on the basis that if they are elected, they will vote for a rule change, meaning there could be another confidence vote as early as Tuesday.
And if we've seen, actually, I suppose the point is also, if they've put themselves up as being, you know, the candidates who want a rule change, then just if they get elected, we can see the mood of the party.
I think so. I think that's definitely the case. It's a very sad state of affairs that it's got to this point, but certainly I think for the sake of the country, and I don't say that in a kind of blasé way. I mean, for every individual in this country who's going through a really difficult time, who deserves better from politicians and better from our institutions, we need to act, and we need to act now.
Deanna, Anas, Will, I'm going to come back to you in a minute. I'm delighted to be joined by Suella Braverman, the Attorney General. You're a rising star of this government. I think possibly, well, one of the youngest Attorney Generals ever, I think. What do you make? We've seen extraordinary criticism of the Prime Minister over the last 24 hours. What do you make of his statements or the statements of his officials tonight that he's simply not going to resign?
Well, Robert, I've been a supporter of Boris's for many years, and I'm incredibly proud to be serving in his administration, and I'm very proud of what he's achieved on Brexit, on COVID, on Ukraine. And I'm incredibly sad today. There's an overwhelming sense of despair and sadness in Parliament amongst Conservative MPs because, to my mind, and it pains me to say this in my heart, but I do think the time has come for the Prime Minister to step down.
And what, in terms of the events of the last few days, has persuaded you of that? Is it actually simply that too many people are resigning and he can't govern?
That's part of it. I think that the facts speak very powerfully for themselves. There are over 40 people, members of the government, who have refused their participation in this administration, who don't have confidence in the Prime Minister's leadership. He is unable to command the confidence of what seems to be the majority of the parliamentary party. And in those circumstances, it is untenable for him to continue as leader.
And what did you make? I mean, I was very struck, for example, that when Victoria Atkins resigned, she sort of resigned in solidarity with Will Quince, who'd been sent out to defend the Prime Minister over the fact that he appointed Chris Pincher as Deputy Chief Whip, despite it now turns out the Prime Minister knowing that there were allegations, serious allegations against Chris Pincher, but poor old Will Quince wasn't told about them, and so he lied to defend the Prime Minister. When you heard that ministers were sent out essentially to lie on the Prime Minister's behalf, what did you make of that?
It's all been handled appallingly over the last 7 days, and the Prime Minister has apologised for it. So, wrongdoing has been acknowledged on his own part. But I think the Pincher incident, and we still don't know some facts, but we know enough, I think, to conclude that it's the latest in a litany of errors and mistakes and problems. And for me, this is why I've continued to support the Prime Minister throughout the travails of the past 6 months. The balance has tipped now in favour of saying that, Prime Minister, it pains me to say it, but it's time to go.
So if you're saying he has to go, I presume in all conscience you feel you can't stay as Attorney-General, can you?
Well, my first duty is to the country, Robert, and as attorney I'm the senior law officer, and we're in a crisis.
Yeah.
And I have statutory, legal and constitutional duties. Today I've been at my desk doing work which is of legal importance and has legal deadlines. I don't want to resign because I have that duty and we need an attorney in government.
But you must recognise that there's a very good chance the Prime Minister will now ask you to resign.
That is his choice, and I will do whatever the Prime Minister asks me to do.
Now, we've also got to look to the future. You plainly want the Tory party to rebuild. What do you think the Conservative Party should be doing? What is the agenda for the Tory party now for you?
Well, I think we've got a manifesto. Our 2019 manifesto commands the confidence of the country, and it sets out a very clear plan. And nothing needs changing in that manifesto. It describes embedding and entrenching the opportunities of Brexit. It describes empowering people economically so that they keep more of their money through tax cuts. It describes a positive vision of what a Conservative government can look like, and I very much wholeheartedly support that manifesto.
Now, I don't know if you've heard this yourself, but actually a number of your colleagues have actually said that they wondered whether you, as and when the time comes for a leadership election, might think about standing.
I'll be straight with you, Robert. Yes, I will. If there is a leadership contest, I will put my name into the ring. I love this country. My parents came here with absolutely nothing, and it was Britain that gave them hope, security and opportunity. And this country has afforded me incredible opportunities in education and in my career. And I owe a debt of gratitude to this country. And to serve as Prime Minister would be the greatest honour. So, yes, I will try.
And just to... Unfortunately, I've got an enormous amount of time, but what do you think, for the new leader, the first priority has to be?
There's many, many priorities, but I think fundamentally we need to deliver some proper tax cuts so that people can be dealing with the cost of living challenges in a more feasible way. We need to shrink the size of the state and cut government spending so we can curb inflation. We need to solve the problem of the boats across the Channel. We need to stop a foreign court interfering in our domestic affairs. We need to make sure the Brexit opportunities are felt for everybody in this country. And lastly, we need to get rid of all of this woke rubbish and actually get back to a country where describing a man and a woman in terms of biology does not mean that you're going to lose your job.
And just back to, I suppose, where we started, have you had conversations with your cabinet colleagues? How many of them, in their hearts, do you think really believe he's got more than a few days left in the job?
Well, this is why I've come on the show and been very plain-speaking and straightforward with you, Robert. I don't want to hide in the shadows and murmur to my colleagues in the corridors. This is what everyone is saying, in the cabinet and outside of it, that the days are numbered, the ship is sinking, and for the sake of the country, for the sake of his own legacy, and for the sake of our party, it is time for the Prime Minister to go.
Suella, very good to see you. Thanks for coming on. And I suspect if there is a leadership election quite soon, we'll be seeing you again. So many thanks again.
Thank you.
So, Deanna, if I could sort of pick up with you. I mean, Suella has just said two very striking things. One, she doesn't believe the Prime Minister, like you, should stay in office. And two, that she'll be a candidate as and when. What do you make of Suella as a candidate?
I think, you know, the kind of vision that Suella's laid out there with regards to tax cuts, proper conservatism, getting back to our roots, is a really positive one. And if I can pick up on one thing that Suella said there that I think is really valuable, I know that there have been a number of ministers who have been getting a lot of stick for kind of not resigning and not, to quote, showing integrity in resigning. But I think Suella makes a really good point that regardless of what is going on, there is still a country to run. We still need ministers in place to do the duties, do the job, as Suella was saying, those statutory duties that must be done. And so I think, you know, to people who are being perhaps unfairly unkind to some of those ministers, just take a second to step back and think about actually what it is they're doing, and that is the duty for their country.
Although she's also done something else, which is, some would say, a bit more courageous than some of them, which is she's also said what she actually thinks, which is it's time for him to go, which most of them haven't done.
Oh, I respect that. I respect plain talking. You know, I'm a girl from the north of England, of course I do. And I think it was good of Suella to be so open and honest and to come and do it on air.
Will, if I could just go back to you for a second. So just describe for us, because, you know, you'll have been with Boris Johnson when he's been under pressure before. What will his mood be now? How will he be sort of thinking through how... Because he doesn't want to go. He'll be looking at all the angles to try and stay. How will he be managing this?
Well, I should think he'd be feeling pretty miserable and pretty conflicted, but Boris only knows one way, and that's forward gear, and often with his back against the wall, he'll come out punching, and that's exactly what he's doing. But the truth of this, Robert, is we face this situation tonight for no other reason than the Prime Minister. He is the one that has, you know, caused his own downfall if eventually he does go, which I think he probably will. And that's simply because he didn't come out in front of this at the very beginning, back at Owen Paterson, back at Partygate. And I think that there, just like when he came in 2019, there wasn't really an ideology and a strategy. I suspect there's probably no ideology and strategy other than to fling punches tonight. And unfortunately, that's not sustainable, and it's no way to run a government. It's no way to run a country.
Anas, if we could look, I mean, you know, let's be, realistic. It may be messy for a while, but it does seem as though the likelihood is the Tory party will have a new leader. Some would say the Labour Party's greatest asset at the moment is Boris Johnson. All the opinion polls show that he's one of the least popular prime ministers, you know, pretty much of all time. I mean, doesn't it worry you at all that you may be up against a rather more effective leader of the Tory party?
It doesn't worry me, and I think Suella's contribution actually emphasises that. Look, of course I've got personal sympathy with the backstory, of course I do. But I think people are going to see right through the fact that when they think the number of the games are up for Boris Johnson, or they think there's a chance for personal gain, they now want to come out and speak against Boris Johnson. When he was illegally proroguing Parliament, they were silent. When he was lying to the Queen, they were silent. When he was breaking the law, they were silent. When he was found guilty of having broken the law, they were silent. When he was partying the night before the Queen's husband's funeral, they were silent. When all the Pincher stuff was happening in the last week, they were silent. Now when the game's a bogey and they've got a chance to stand for positions of power themselves, they now want to pretend they're people of principle. People can see right through it.
You've made your point. Come on, Anushka.
Thank Well, that Suella Braverman interview was quite something, and Twitter is going quite wild at it. I'll have to tweak some of the things I'm about to talk about right now, because I'm going to talk about Boris Johnson's top team, or what it looked like when he had his cabinet meeting yesterday morning. As we know, by the end of the day, 2 big beasts had gone, but I have to get my pen out because things are changing tonight. Michael Gove has been sacked. Simon Hart has resigned. And, I mean, I can't cross Suella out as yet, but I have put to number 10 what she said. And I suspect that saying the Prime Minister has to go and she's running for leadership means she's going to be gone too. Others are standing by him, at least for now, like Nadhim Zahawi, like Liz Truss. Although most of the people on here have made their views clear, they don't think he's likely to stay for very long. And that is why people are thinking about what comes next, and that is a possible leadership campaign. Here are some of the people we expect to be running. I'm afraid I didn't put Suella Braverman in here, but Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak are among those who have gone. Quite a few who are still loyal: Liz Truss, Nadhim Zahawi, Penny Mordaunt, a minister, and Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, plus at least a couple from outside the cabinet like Jeremy Hunt and Tom Tugendhat. Now, to win, they need to win over MPs, and then the final 2 go to Tory members. So let me show you the latest data on what the public think of our candidates, and that's from Savanta here, what Tory members think from a Conservative home panel here. So the ones at this end are very, very popular with Tory grassroots. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, at the top. Penny Mordaunt there as well, and Elizabeth Truss. If they get through to the final 2, that certainly bodes well for them. But MPs want to keep their seats, so they want to know how high all of these candidates are in this direction. And look, overall, they're pretty close. This is percentage support. They're all under 20, but top right now on 14.4% is the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. Robert.
So I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Hancock, former Health Secretary. You've been consistently loyal to the Prime Minister. Are you still backing him? Should he stay?
Well, it's not really a matter of whether I'm backing him. His cabinet isn't backing him, and I'm very sad
quite a lot
about
of them are.
that. Well, half of them aren't, and one's just sat in this seat and said that he needs to go. It makes me very... It's sad. It's a sad end. I've worked incredibly closely with Boris. We've done some huge things, like the vaccine programme together. But it's clear that whether it's tomorrow or next Tuesday, there's going to be a new Prime Minister. And what matters is what that new Prime Minister stands for. We're not there yet in terms of who. I mean, I know that the media debate will go on to who, but what matters is what.
OK, well, let's come on to the what in a second, but I do want to clear up. You know, you can't just shift responsibility to other people. Do you personally believe the Prime Minister should stand down?
Well, yes, of course. And sadly, he's lost the support of his cabinet, many of his ministers, and the parliamentary party. And I have supported him through thick and thin, and we've been in the trenches together, working incredibly hard together. But unfortunately, it's come to the point where he needs to resign, and he won't be the leader of the Conservative Party in a very short period of time, whether that's tomorrow or next week.
And just to be clear, is the problem who he is or what he's done?
Well, what I care about, actually, is what's next. Of course,
But is what's next essentially different from what he's been doing?
Well, he has, unfortunately, lost the confidence of the Conservative Party and his cabinet, not least because of the handling of this Chris Pincher affair over the last week. But what really matters, and the big debate that's already starting, is what's next. And I think it is so important that we have somebody as the Prime Minister who can unite the country, who can appeal to north and south, to urban and rural, and that we don't go down a more narrow...
So who do you have in mind? Who is the... Who
I'm not going to go into who tonight. I'm not going to answer that question.
You can't talk in generalities.
Well, I was going to say, because nobody's running, but now there is somebody running, so I can't say that.
Sorry, you're backing Suella?
No, what I'm saying is that the debate immediately goes to who, and it's really important we take a moment over this weekend over this weekend to think what. And it's so important. And
I agree with you. And I want to drill down into some of these policy issues and, some of the other issues about Boris Johnson in just a moment. you're going to stay with us. I hope all of you are going to stay with us. Don't go away, because much more on the issue that, you know, is going to determine the future of the UK. Who after Boris Johnson? And what after Boris Johnson? Welcome back. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock is still with me. We were talking about what any new leader has to do. Now, one of the most striking things in the resignation letter written by Rishi Sunak, the now former Chancellor, was he said that the Prime Minister and he don't see eye to eye on managing the economy. The Prime Minister, briefings on the Prime Minister's behalf are saying that's because the Prime Minister wants to cut taxes sooner than Rishi Sunak thought was prudent. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think, firstly, we've got one of the biggest tax cuts going through literally today. So there is...
But Boris Johnson wants more.
There's tax cutting happening. You've got to have responsibility as well as alleviating the pressure on the finances. You know this. You can't end up having a more inflationary situation by putting too much in. We've got to get through the inflation. So you need fiscal responsibility.
Also, the public finances are a dreadful mess because of the way that the interest bill is surging.
That's one of the reasons, and COVID and the war. And we've got to have prudent management of the economy and cutting taxes where we can. What I think is really important...
So broadly, are you broadly on the Rishi Sunak side of this argument?
Well, I think we cannot have a country that doesn't have sustainable public finances. One of the reasons that people...
just be say yes or no. Are you more on the Rishi Sunak side of this argument?
I'm saying what I think.
Right.
I'm not taking a characterised debate. What I'm saying is I think you've got to have responsibility and then cutting taxes and obviously the growth agenda. Now, how do we pull the whole country together behind that? That is the trick. Well, I think just promising tax cuts that cannot be afforded is not a good proposal, and it doesn't get Conservatives governments very far because people want us to have a responsible program.
Particularly at a time when we've got this dreadful cost of living crisis, where pay rises in the public sector, they're going to be well below the rate of inflation if Boris Johnson has his way. How do you unite the country?
Well, by telling hard truths. Sometimes you need to tell hard truths, right? This inflation has come from the war and the hangover from COVID, the fact that China's still in COVID lockdown, and we need to be straightforward with people about that, and we need to cut their taxes where we can, like we're doing today. But you've got to do it in a responsible manner. I think people are up for that grown-up, competent, serious description of what needs to happen. People know that there's a hard road to tread, and I think people know that right across the country.
And so two quick ones. I said we're almost out of time. Steve Barclay, new Health Secretary. You were Health Secretary for a while. What one short piece of advice for him?
Oh, the short piece of advice, undoubtedly, is drive those tech reforms that had been going on before, that Sajid carried on with.
Tech. That's
100%.
Never heard that before.
That is the future of... That is how we keep the NHS affordable in the long run.
And secondly, you did stand in the last leadership election. You've had a slightly bumpy ride since then. Are you standing again this time?
No, I'm not standing, but I do care deeply about what happens next and the agenda that can unite the country and make sure that we deliver on those promises for people with a government that can really deliver.
But like to go back into government, I assume, would you?
Well, I'm happy to serve, but I'm not in a hurry. But I do care about the direction that we take the country. And I think it's important to have that debate about the substance, not just about the personalities.
Matt, as always, good to see you. I'm delighted to be joined by former Chief Whip of the Tory party, Julian Smith. Very good to see you, Julian. Extraordinary events today. Very few of us have lived through political turmoil of this sort. Seems, certainly to observers like myself, that a majority of Tory MPs want Boris Johnson to go. He is saying he is not going to go. He's going to fight his critics. What do you make of all that?
Well, having told previous Prime Minister Theresa May that she'd lost the confidence of the party, Robert, I find it pretty incredible today that Boris Johnson, who's obviously achieved a great deal in delivering Brexit, taking the country through the pandemic, does not have the respect for the fact that the constitution in the United Kingdom works on the basis of confidence of Parliament, confidence of his MPs. And I think it's a real shame that we find tonight he's saying that he wants to stick around to tomorrow, to the weekend, to a confidence vote. His time is up, and he now needs to do the right thing.
And do you think the sort of trade union bit of Tory MPs, the 22 executive, should have organised things a bit differently today?
I think that's a very polite thing to say. They bottled it. I mean, I'd ask my colleagues who have been on your show tonight, have they made a call to the Prime Minister? Have they directly told him that confidence has gone? We all have a responsibility. We're all MPs. The public is sitting there looking on in despair. The civil service, who is now running the country despite the criticisms that we've made consistently against the good women and men in the civil service in this government, are left looking on aghast. And, you know, Boris Johnson needs to leave tomorrow. As I say, he's had some major achievements. He can resign, as Theresa May did, formally in a couple of weeks, make a statement tomorrow, and then have a period of transition. But he knows that's going to happen, but instead seems to be looking for headlines, I don't know, maybe for a future career, and to look like a hard man. But the British Constitution, the Constitution which he said he was fighting for when he did Brexit, is now in tatters tonight as he has lost the confidence of his party.
And we haven't got much time, I'm afraid, but are you disappointed that I think we've actually only seen 3 members of the Cabinet actually resign? I suspect after what Suella Braverman has said on this show tonight, very critical of the Prime Minister, she will have to go. Should the Cabinet itself have been tougher with the Prime Minister?
I think there have been some very good women and men today resigning. The future of the Conservative Party, people who are younger than me, who will be leading the party in the future, and any Cabinet Minister who raised the issue of the loss of confidence today with the Prime Minister and who he ignored, I believe should now leave.
Julian, as always, very good to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to go to Anushka. That was very striking, very strong from Julian Smith, I thought. But Anushka, you've got something
I've got
to share with
some of the very, very, very many tweets about Suella Braverman's interview, and I just want to show you some of them. So this is Andrew Lillico, who's a commentator. I'm just flabbergasted by this. Braverman, a cabinet attendee, calls on TV for the PM to resign and says she'll run to replace him, but isn't resigning herself. He cannot believe that. Michael Savage from The Observer, just another totally normal evening where ultra-loyalist Suella Braverman calls for the PM to stand down and says she'll run for leader. The Mail on Sunday pointing out that there have been lots of interviews with her recently where she's been talking about what she thinks about education, about civil service, about trans rights. And then an MP, Jason McCartney, who was working for her, I agree with my boss, the Attorney General.
That's very interesting, isn't it? Suella, I was very struck by what Julian Smith said. Sorry, I forgot losing my mouth.
It's been a long day.
It's been a long
very
day.
long
Believe me,
day.
it's been long. Deanna, forgive me. Very struck by what Julian was saying about how this constitution, our unwritten constitution, basically functions on the basis that the people at the top know these sort of unwritten rules and follow them. Right? And as he pointed out, there is a convention that says if you lose the confidence of your party, you resign. And, you know, he looked genuinely sorrowful at what he thinks is not only being the damage that's being done to the party, but just general confidence in the way this place works.
I think what the last few months in particular have showed us is that Boris Johnson doesn't pay too much regard to the rules.
Yeah. And how does one... Anas, let's try and take this out of party politics for a second. But, you know, it really matters that people have confidence in the system. And we've seen so many damages to people's confidence. I mean, you know, just one huge issue, you know, just all the evidence that so many people working in Parliament aren't safe. You know, the harassment, the bullying, the abuse.
I mean, it's terrible. I mean, there's other cases, not just the Pincher case over the last week. You've seen it with other political parties, you've seen it with other politicians. But one of the things, and I've said this publicly before, is Boris Johnson is a man, and you just said that yourself, Deanna, as someone that doesn't believe the rules apply to him. And, you know, he is unique in that sense that I don't think there's anyone as immoral as he is, without integrity as he is, and dishonest as he is. The challenge you have, though, is, and I think you can see that slowly coming through from what Matt was saying and what Suella was saying, is they want to try and pretend it's day zero. This is not day zero of a Tory government. After Boris Johnson goes, it's not a fresh start of day zero. This is 12 years of chaos that we've had inflicted on us in the country. And I think people will be really, really angry across the country.
I mean, I think, just to be fair, I think the events of today have been sort of chaotic on a scale that I don't think we've seen every day over the last
It's made the thick of it look like a serious political drama, put it that way.
I was talking to Deanna earlier about the fact that, you know, Armando Iannucci has written some of the best political satire. I mean, you know, he would definitely have struggled.
He can write this stuff.
Absolutely not.
I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. But listen, I've got tons more to discuss with both of you and with Anushka. We're also got, I don't know if you, like me, are a bit of a fan of the skits that the comedian Michael Spicer does when he plays the sort of special advisor who's trying to control what our crazy politicians are saying. So we're going to try, I think, and sort of lighten the mood slightly after the break, but also, I'm afraid, a bit more of the serious stuff about whether this country, as and when we get a new Prime Minister. So welcome back on a day of total political chaos. I think somehow seems completely appropriate that I'm joined by the comedian and writer Michael Spicer, who's sort of made a living out of sort of pointing out the absurdities of what many of our politicians sort of come up with. So, I love your room next door format. Wearing your sort of room next door writer's, creator's hat, what did you make of the chaos of today?
Well, the interesting thing is, I think I wouldn't have been able to write a sketch that wouldn't become immediately dated. So I think if the room next door man was an actual, real human being, I think he probably would have resigned. No.
Oh, my God, you've shattered the illusion. Anyway, go on.
I think he would have resigned by now as well, because this is far too much for one normal person to take, I think.
I mean, one of the things that's been very striking, as somebody who sort of lives and breathes this world, is, you know, your conceit is it's the politicians who are idiots, and there's this genius advisor behind the scene who's just trying to stop them making fools of themselves. But I'll be completely honest with you, some of the advisors are bleeding idiots too. So have you never thought about essentially turning the tables?
Well, I thought about ending Room Next Door a while ago by doing a sketch where he finds his polar opposite in an alternate universe who's actually feeding the poor lines by telling Priti Patel to say counter-terrorism 8 times in a 2-minute interview.
Yeah.
So, yes, there is... I totally get that. I think he's got more of a moral compass rather than being a supreme intellect, let's just say that.
I mean, Deanna, what do you reckon? Do you think there are bragging rights among politicians if you're done, as it were, done over by Michael?
I think so, absolutely. You know, I think...
Is it one of your ambitions?
Maybe one day. We were having some banter in the green room beforehand, so I'm expecting big things now, but...
OK.
No pressure, no pressure.
Edinburgh Fringe is a place to make it happen.
Absolutely.
Yes, indeed.
But you're on the Edinburgh Fringe, aren't you?
Yes, I'm at the Edinburgh
Fringe. And what's happening?
I'm doing a Room Next Door show.
How do you do it live, as it were?
I've split the show up into 2 halves. So basically, on one side of the stage, I've got my Room Next Door set up, and I do live interactions with video projections, like, for instance, Matt Hancock, who is a big star of my show. And then I go to the other side where I've got a lectern, and I talk about what it was like going viral and what social media is like for people like me.
Now,
how it works.
in the interests of balance, it does seem to me that over the years you've disproportionately done members of the government. Why haven't you done the Labour Party?
Well, I have recently done Keir Starmer.
OK.
Because he couldn't say wealth tax to Beth Rigby.
Oh, yes, yes, that was quite...
and eventually he did. He surrendered at the end and he said, yeah, all right, yes, a wealth tax. Because taxing the rich isn't as controversial as he thinks. But no, it is disproportionate because the Conservatives are in power. And they're the ones who...
So it's a holding power to account thing, is it?
It's holding the power to account. I would gladly do anyone if it was a good car crash interview, for sure.
Now, Anas, you've had a fairly easy ride tonight, and I think that's got to end...
You're going to redress that,
I'm afraid that's got to end just briefly. And the thing which I assume must be weighing on you is, you know, we had this speech from Keir Starmer earlier this week, which basically signs Labour up, whatever you may say, to effectively Boris Johnson's hard Brexit, which is hated in Scotland. So, you know, you have made progress in rebuilding Labour in Scotland, but that's all going to be knocked into reverse now, isn't it, by your leader's approach to Brexit?
Look, I think clearly it's a challenge, but I think I would be inconsistent if I said I don't think we should have a second independence referendum, but I think it's OK for us to have a second referendum on Brexit.
No, but it's not the referendum issue. It's the fact that he doesn't want membership of the customs union or the single market.
I was going to make that point. I think we should be. Look, we know what the Tories are going to accuse us of. We know the Tories are going to say they want to take us back into the European Union by the back door, even though it's not true. We know they're going to say you're going to do a coalition with the SNP, even though we know it's not true. We know they're going to say you're going to be in the hands of the trade unions, even though it's not true. So we should be confident enough to say we're not suggesting we go back into the European Union. Of course we're not. Britain's made its decision. Let's not open up that division again.
Khan has made it absolutely clear that he thinks
but actually having
that the UK should go back to the single market. Why aren't you standing up for Scotland in the way he says he's standing up for London?
We had a vote in Parliament, it didn't pass. But having a UK government that is proactive in saying when it's in our interest to work with the European Union and the British national interests around trade, around the economy, around jobs,
then
we should be brave enough to do that.
But is Sadiq wrong, therefore?
I'm not seeing the words that Sadiq Khan said, but do we need to have a better, more aligned relationship with the European Union? Yes. Do we need to work together when it's in our interest? Yes. Are we going back into the European Union? Sadly not. But again, I say...
there is this middle ground. There is this middle ground that your leader has ruled out.
Well, I'm not sure that is the middle ground. I mean, we did have the opportunity in the last Parliament to get Parliament to agree to a customs union and single market, and it didn't pass in the last Parliament when the Brexit deal was going through. So do we need to change the relationship? Yes, we do. Do we need to fix the problems of Brexit? Yes, we do. But again, as I say, I would be inconsistent if I said, let's reopen the Brexit in or out debate, but we shouldn't reopen the independence yes or no debate. Both, I think, are divisive. Both put people into camps. And I actually think we need some unity and some healing in our country, particularly after the 12 years of chaos we've had on the Conservatives.
Yeah, and I'm going to come to you in a minute, but first, I think, Anushka, you're going to share some stuff with us, aren't you?
Yeah, just some tweets that are coming in as we're on air. So this is Paul McNamara from Channel 4 saying, judging by the text he's getting from backbenchers, Suella Braverman won't necessarily have a big camp, but it is nice and rare when people just give a straight answer. No obfuscating, no, there isn't a vacancy right now, just straight talk. Armando Iannucci, the satirist, has a different take on it. He tweeted a clip of her saying she was going to stand as leader, saying, I was out this evening, then this happened. I'm not sure I've come home properly. I may be medically confused. Where's the sky, mummy? The people are on the telly again. Hope you're not talking about us there. And just a reminder that they have to fill ministerial positions. Henry Zeffman saying, journalist Henry Zeffman saying, half an hour left for the cabinet appointments that we were promised would happen. And let me just show you a couple of big front pages. Mortally wounded PM defies cabinet, demands that he quits. And The Times, Johnson fights for his life.
So it is quite striking, isn't it? I mean, lots of people today told the Prime Minister, including members of his own cabinet, that he was going to struggle to fill these posts. Downing Street was briefing people like me that there was going to be, appointments. It was going to be clear that the Prime Minister could put together a team. As Henry Zeffman from The Times says, nothing so far.
Well, there was a lot of joking in Parliament sort of earlier on this afternoon after the big swathe of resignations people who either had resigned or have been very vocal and sort of anti-Boris over the months saying, can't wait to get my phone call and turn it down tomorrow. But I think it is getting to this point now where on a pure numbers game, it's becoming damn nigh impossible for the Prime Minister to fill these roles and have a full government. You know, I said right at the beginning of the show, you need to see that the writing's on the wall.
Now, people see you as one of the more influential of the newer intake. Do you have a view yet as who you would back?
In terms of the leadership?
Yeah.
You know, I said earlier, I'm genuinely not trying to obfuscate. I haven't really made a firm decision yet, but for me, it has to be about the vision, because I think one of the things that I found the saddest over the past 6 months, maybe even longer, is that aside from the slogans of kind of levelling up, which is something that I'm very much behind and believe in, I don't feel there's been a vision that has been uniting our party, that the country and that all of our MPs can get behind to pull together all these different strands. So there have been some fantastic policies we've been enacting, but it hasn't been pulled together in one vision. If a candidate can come forward with a good, strong vision that will kind of, again, I feel like I'm using the buzzwords, but genuinely unite the party, unite the country behind a vision that's going to make people's lives better, because that's why we go into politics. We don't go into politics to be someone. Most of us go into politics to do something and make people's lives better. So, and there needs to be a good economic vision.
Fortunately, sadly, we are out of time. I wanted to ask you which of the candidates will give you most material, but you'll have
to tell you, but never mind.
Anyway, look, that's it. God, disappointing for me. Politics is sometimes a soap opera. What we've witnessed is more nuts than fiction. How would it all end? Bye.